introduce our Erin Fuller, who will be talking about how to build a bird-friendly yard. Ms. Fuller is the watershed coordinator for the Van Buren Conservation District. In this role, she has been creating and implementing conservation projects for over 18 years. She is also an avid bird watcher and is the past president of the Audubon Society of Kalamazoo. Ms. Fuller earned a BA in biology from Skidmore College and an MA in environmental geography from Western Michigan University. She has been creating bird-friendly habitat on her city property for many years, and she will discuss how to follow nature's lead to transform your yard into a haven for birds and reduce your environmental impact. She also will provide ideas and resources to create habitats with ecological value that support birds and wildlife in all seasons. Erin, I'll turn it over to you now. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to this, and I really appreciate everybody who's joined us today. Give me just a second and I will get my screen shared. Does that look all right?
Yep.
Okay, and let me get so I can see you all again, so I don't feel like I'm speaking into a void. Okay, I think I have everybody organized. Well, yes, thank you so much, Tom, and to the whole HASP community for having me today. I'm excited to talk about birds. My real life job, I work for the Van Buren Conservation District, and I do a lot of work with water quality, which is very good and important work, and I really enjoy it. But man, I like to talk about birds and wildlife and friendly landscaping, wildlife friendly landscaping. So I appreciate the opportunity to do this. It's definitely a more fun project for me. And Tom gave a great background of who I am. I started bird watching in college, so this is something I've been doing for a while now. And it's just, like I said, it's one of the things I really enjoy. I also want to talk just really quickly about conservation districts, because that's where I work and they're an excellent resource for you. There's a conservation district in almost every county across the United States and in Michigan. There are some conservation districts that are combined. They'll have two counties and one office. But at least in the area we're talking about, there's a Van Buren Conservation District, there's an Allegan Conservation District, there's an Ottawa, Kent. So most of Western and Southwestern Michigan has their own office. And we do all kinds of different things. We are technically considered a local unit of state government. We don't get a whole lot of state funding. We get a few $1,000s. I don't even know what it is, $20,000 or something. But most of our funding comes from grants, both state and federal grants. And so each conservation district runs a little differently depending on their projects. But if you have any interest in natural resources in any way, which I'm guessing you do because you're here, check out what is happening at your local conservation district, because they can be a fantastic resource for you. So I had to get that plug in, just so everybody sort of knew where I was coming from. All right, so what we'll talk about today, again, I have two different screens, so I'm making sure I can both see people and see my slide at the same time. Okay, I've got it. And the other thing, I'm going to try to remember to say the name of the bird and any identifiable plants on each slide. I'm likely to forget. So if there are ones that, as we're going, you are curious what species is on the slide, make a note in the chat, and we can come back to that at the end, and I'll try to identify everything. So in this slide, we have an American goldfinch, and it's a male feeding on purple coneflower seed head. So what we're going to cover today are sort of the basic principles of bird-friendly landscaping. Some very, very basic landscaping principles, because I'm not a landscaper. Keeping birds safe as you're thinking about bird-friendly landscaping, And then I'm going to do a yard tour just to show you an example, what I've done in my own yard, because I think that's sometimes more helpful than anything, just to see how somebody else has taken this on. And then I have a bunch of resources that I'll share with you. And I think Kim put the links in the chat, I believe. So if you want to just copy and paste those into a text document of some kind, you'll have access to those. I am certainly not the be all and end all of information. So I want to give sort of a broad overview, but then those links are really where you can find a lot of really good nitty-gritty information. So as we're talking about building a better backyard for birds, we have to start with what do birds need? And I think these are all things that we probably know about. Birds need food, they need shelter or some kind of cover, some habitat. They need a place to raise their young, they need water, and they need sustainable yard practices. They need us not to be doing things that are going to harm their health in any way. And this is a Baltimore Oriole in an apple tree. Here we have a pileated woodpecker and family, two little youngsters there. And when we are thinking about this concept of improving our yards for wildlife and birds, I like to think that we need to follow nature's lead. We need to look at what's happening in the nature and the landscape around us and try to mimic that as best we can while maintaining what we need out of our yards. You know, you may have a need to have it look a certain way, but how can you do that while still following nature's lead as best as possible? And so what nature tells us is that we need diversity. We need to have as many different species as possible, different types of vegetation, not just grasses, not just flowers, not just trees, but a mix of all of those. We need to think about cycles, how things in nature live and die, what happens when things die in nature. They don't get swept and bagged up and taken to the dump. The things are left to naturally decompose in nature, and that process of decomposition can add a lot of diversity and important elements in your landscape. But we don't necessarily want to leave all of the dead vegetation in our yards all of the time. So it's just trying to, thinking about that balance between what would happen in a natural setting and what we can tolerate in a more landscape setting. So one example would be if a tree in your yard dies, is it in a spot where you could let it stand and become habitat for woodpeckers? As it decomposes, it will attract a lot of different kinds of beetles that make great food for birds. But if it's hanging over our house, no, we're probably not going to be able to let it stand. Or if it's in our front yard and is unsightly, no, that's probably not going to work. So again, it's that balance. In nature, yes, that tree would stand as a dead tree and be home to beetles and grubs and woodpeckers for several years before it finally fell down. If we can tolerate that in our yard, if it's in a place where that's appropriate, great. If not, that's understandable too. There's also a lot of talk about springtime garden cleanup, when to do your garden cleanup. And we try to encourage people to wait as long as they can to just let everything be, because there's a lot of insects that overwinter in the hollow stems of dead plants. And if we clean up our gardens too early in the spring, all of those insects go away, and those insects are bird food. I like to think of, they're insects too in their own right, and they're pollinators and are doing important things in the habitat in the environment. But you can think of them as bird food as well. And so if you remove plants too early, you're removing an important early food source for birds in the spring. And the last thing I want to talk about is structure. In your landscape or in nature, things are happening at different elevations. You have your ground cover down low, then you have shrubs a little higher, and then you have tall trees. And so thinking about your yard in that context as well, and trying to have things happening at different heights. Those three different concepts are just a few of the things we can think about when we're thinking about how things function in nature and how we can adapt that to our yard. And here we have blue jays and cardinals and a chickadee on a bird feeder. And so we'll start by talking about food, having food sources in your yard. A lot of people often think about seeds when they think about bird food, and that is an important food source for a lot of birds. But that only covers a few different species, right? There's a lot of other types of food that birds, different species will need. So you can think about a whole different variety of bird feeders that serve different types of birds. Some like to feed on those tube style bird feeders. Some will only eat on platforms or from the ground. Some eat suet, some eat fruit, nectar. Hummingbirds will eat nectar. So having a variety of different food types in your bird feeders is important. Then thinking about your landscaping and what it might offer the birds. So do you have plants that are left to go to seed that birds can then come in and eat the seeds? Do you have plants that are attracting insects, which that's bird food? Do you have shrubs that provide fruit through, in the late fall for migrating birds? Oak trees that provide acorns and other trees that have nuts that can be important food sources. Of course, flowers that provide nectar for hummingbirds. Other birds are also a food source, and small mammals are a food source for owls and hawks. So I know it's kind of disturbing sometimes if you're feeding the birds and a hawk swoops in and eats a little bird off your bird feeder, but that's part of the ecosystem, right? You're providing bird food for that hawk. So like I said, it can be a little disturbing, but I try to think of it in terms of the natural ecosystem. And this is a barred owl, which is one of the 3 owls that are most commonly found in our part of Michigan. I should have said too, I apologize. I am talking to you from Kalamazoo, Michigan. It's always sort of funny to see a disembodied face on this computer screen, but I'm in Kalamazoo, Michigan. In non-pandemic times, when I'm not working from my home office, I work in Van Buren County, Michigan, in Paw Paw. And then I'm from Allegan originally, so I've gone all over Southwest Michigan, basically. I worked in Berrien County, so but just so you know, have a little context about where I'm from. And this picture was taken, there's a nature preserve behind my house, and that's where this photograph was taken by a friend of mine. So this is a barred owl, showing an example of shelter. So when you're thinking about the shelter aspect of what birds need, they need spots for roosting, just for a safe place to rest. So this barred owl is in a spruce tree, trying to stay hidden from crows. We have a lot of crows that as soon as they find an owl, they'll start attacking and yelling at it. And so if an owl can hide pretty well in an evergreen tree, that's good shelter for them. They need nesting habitat. And they also need protection from different kinds of weather, rain and snow and all the fun Michigan weather that we get. So just those are some of the different things to think about in your own yard, having, thickets, having evergreens if you can, leaving brush piles. It's not necessarily a beautiful thing to have a brush pile in your yard, but if you have a little out of the way spot where you can have something like that, it makes a great hiding spot for little birds. One of the things that I often do after the holidays are over, I take my Christmas tree and set it out near my bird feeders and let it just sort of break down out there. And it's in my backyard, so it doesn't look terribly unsightly. To me, it looks like a birdhouse because the little birds just hang out like crazy in there. My slide went backwards. And so you can see, 10 or 20 little birds are hiding in there and darting out to the bird feeder and then hiding back in that old Christmas tree. And then once winter is over, then we cut it up and use it for kindling. But just another example of something you can use in your landscape as shelter for the little birds. Here we have a chickadee with a grub in its mouth. So birdhouses are one aspect of shelter that we can have in our yards. I have a couple of different kinds of birdhouses. just make sure that you have the right design of birdhouse for the species that you're looking for. So some examples of birdhouses that work well in Southwest Michigan are ones for chickadees and bluebirds, wrens, tree swallows, wood ducks, and screech owls. But as you can imagine, there are different requirements for those different species. A screech owl box will not work for a chickadee and vice versa. So just make sure that you know what you are hoping to attract, and make sure that you have all of the dimensions right. You have the box dimension right, you have the right size entrance hole. You want birdhouses that don't have perches because that allows easier access for predators. Birds are able to fly right in to the entrance holes. They don't actually need a perch. Use untreated wood, and make sure that the temperature inside the box will be properly regulated, that they have thick enough walls, they won't bake too much in the sun. And this is this Nest Watch link has all of the basics. So if you have a birdhouse and you want to make sure that it works for the types of species you're looking for, take a look at that link, and it will kind of walk you through all of the details that you need. The other thing to keep in mind are that you want to clean it out fairly regularly, or not regularly, but at the end of each season, basically. So you want something, if possible, that you can clean out at the end of the year. If too much material stacks up in there, it can start to harbor mites and things like that. So having a house that's easy to remove all the detritus at the end of the season is a good idea. Here is a northern cardinal, a female northern cardinal, taking advantage of a bird bath. So this is, I think, the last element that we'll talk about of the different elements that you need for birds in your landscape is, if possible, some kind of water element for drinking and for bathing both. And not every yard will work for this, or maybe you live near a lake and the birds have all the water they need. Although sometimes, depending on the bird, if you are near a lake, or Lake Michigan or something like that, that's almost too much water, and they would prefer a still water body or a bird bath where they can get in and bathe without getting washed away by waves. They're also really attracted by the sound of moving water. So if you have a water fountain or anything like that, that really brings birds in. A few years ago, my husband built a little pond in our yard and even made a little waterfall feature, and it's so fun. Especially the robins, for whatever reason, robins seem to love that. I don't know if they're especially attracted to the sound of it, or what their story is, but that having that waterfall feature, so the birds can hear it from a ways away, and they definitely use that for drinking and bathing. I just wanted to share this graphic. This is from Michigan Audubon, from a little workbook that they have, but it just kind of goes through some of the elements of a bird-friendly yard. Snags, that's just another word for a dead tree. Like we talked about, if you have an appropriate spot to leave a dead tree, then that will be attractive to a good variety of birds. Having vines, a lot of vines produce berries that birds love to eat. Shrubs, a variety of shrubs that might have berries and nesting opportunities and attract insects to your yard. Wildflowers, using native wildflowers that are native to Michigan will be most attractive to the widest variety of our native birds. And having grasses. I think a lot of times we don't think about some of the smaller grasses in our landscaping, but some of our native grasses can be really attractive to birds. They provide food material, nesting material, and they are attractive to our native insects. Nectar plants for hummingbirds, other pollinators, orioles, things like that. Having water, ground cover, and then larger canopy trees that will provide a lot of good nesting habitat. So these pictures are from my yard. We have at the top an American goldfinch in winter plumage, and it is standing on a New England aster, I believe. It's a late fall picture, so it's a little hard to tell, but I think that's a New England aster. And then sort of the winter picture, that's my yard in the winter. So I leave my seed heads up for the birds, and all of those little marks in the snow are bird tracks. So you can see the birds have been very happily feeding off the seed heads in my yard. So that's my philosophy, is don't be too tidy. If you can leave standing dead trees, do that. If you can leave vegetation, dead vegetation standing over the winter, like here, do that. Don't rake up all of your leaves. If, again, if there's a spot in your yard where you can just let the leaf litter lie over the winter without killing your grass, do that. It attracts a lot of insects and other invertebrates that are bird food. And then, as I mentioned earlier, wait to do a spring cleanup until mid to late April. I think they say like that they want the average daily temperature to be about 50 degrees to protect those overwintering insects. So in Michigan, that's usually mid to late April, today notwithstanding. But the caveat on that, don't be too tidy, is you have to, be comfortable yourself with a little untidiness, and that not everybody is comfortable with the same level of untidiness. So do what works for you, and also check local ordinances to make sure that what you want to do is in compliance with local ordinances. So every different community has a different level of ordinances, but you can look at your local weed ordinance is usually what it's called. So for example, I know in Kalamazoo, we have a weed ordinance that says if you have plants that are over 12 inches in height, they have to be part of a garden or a planned landscape. And so that's what I have in my yard. My plants are definitely over 12 inches, but they are part of a planned garden. And I can prove that by going out and doing maintenance. I'll go out in the spring and the late spring and clean up some of the dead stalks from the year before. And I'll do a little bit of weeding during the summer. And so I have not had a problem. I've been in my house for 19 years now, and I've had one complaint, and it turned out it was my curb lawn, which is lawn grass. And I went on vacation for 2 weeks and forgot to ask my neighbors to mow it. So it turned out that the complaint was not about my native landscaping. It was about the one part of my yard that is lawn grass that just got too long because I was gone. So again, that's my neighborhood and my comfort level with tidiness and my local weed ordinances, and that's going to be different wherever you are. So keep that in mind, as don't be too tidy within reason. And so this is sort of the norm in a lot of areas, that these are very tidy landscapes. This is a lot of grass, not many plants. The plants that are in these are probably not native plants. There's, on the right-hand picture, there's one tree that's probably habitat for a robin, but that might be it. So what I like to think about is that we are trying to kind of change what's the norm. Why does this have to be what's normal? Why does this have to be what we aspire to? Is there something else we can do? Can we do things better for wildlife in a way that we as humans can tolerate? And that's always the balance, right? Like how little lawn can I have and still fit in the neighborhood? And that, again, that will be different for everybody. Everybody's tolerance will be a little different. But if you look at this type of landscape, you can see there is just not a lot of habitat for birds. And I like, as much as possible, to try to think about how I can make habitat in my own world and not just relegate wildlife to natural areas. How can we bring more wildlife into our lives? So could we do something more like this? So on the left is, that's over on the east side of the state on a lakefront property, and on the right-hand side, that's my yard and my neighborhood. So could we do something more like this? Not not so much mowed grass, more native plants. Both of these have some mowed grass. Here's my famous curb lawn that I did get the weed violation, or it wasn't actually a weed violation, it was just a complaint that as soon as I mowed it, it was fine. That's my little bit of mowed grass in my yard. And this yard has some mowed grass as well. And they have steps down to the lake. They're still able, these folks, I know they have grandkids, they're still able to have their grandkids play in the yard. Their grandkids can still use the little beach and dock area. But most of their landscape, they have big tall trees, they have smaller shrubs, they have ground cover, they have a lot of vegetation right at the lake shore. So again, that's sort of looking to nature and trying to incorporate some of those different types of vegetation into their landscape as much as possible. And same with mine. I have a real small front yard, and so there's not a lot of room for shrubs, although I do have, out of the picture, I do have some hemlock trees, which have been great for, we've seen owls roosting in them and a few different varieties of interesting birds hanging out in those hemlock trees. And then I have a peach tree, just a little peach tree for fun. That's excellent bird and squirrel habitat. I almost never get peaches because the birds and squirrels beat me to it. So maybe I've done too well at my job creating habitat. But anyway, is this something we could aspire to, having more of our yards look like these and be more bird friendly, more wildlife habitat friendly? So here are just a few different Michigan native plants, just as examples for some of the things that you can have in your landscape. I think sometimes Michigan native plants get a bad rap for looking too wild, but there are some really lovely ways to use them in ways that support the environment. So on the left is a swamp milkweed plant with a monarch caterpillar. In the middle is a cardinal flower. In the top right, that's cup plant and New England aster primarily. And in the bottom right, we have gray-headed coneflower and purple coneflower primarily. So these are the sorts of native plants that will contribute to a diverse and vibrant, alive yard. And you can look for plants that will bloom all different times of year. It won't just be one thing all summer. It'll change throughout the seasons and will provide benefit to wildlife throughout the seasons. And why we really encourage people to use plants that are native to their areas, in our case, native to Southwest Michigan, is they're well adapted to our region, and they provide habitat and food for a wider variety of our local wildlife. And this photograph here is a Queen of the Prairie plant, which has a fantastic name for one, and is just a really cool, it's a nice big tall prairie plant. So that's why it's called Queen of the Prairie. So this is a very subjective list, but these are my top 10 native plants to attract birds in our part of Michigan. And I've sort of cheated because I've shoehorned a few different species into some of these. So that first one, coneflower, there are several different kinds of coneflowers that are great food sources for birds. Gray-headed coneflower, purple coneflower, there's a few different species even of purple coneflowers. So a pretty good variety. Oh, and in the photo here, I have Lupin and wild Columbine. Amongst other things. Those are the two that are mainly blooming in that photo there. So the second one on there is Columbine. That's a great nectar source for hummingbirds. And many of you probably know this, but they are basically shaped like a hummingbird beak. So the hummingbirds stick their beaks up there. They get the nectar that's at the tip of the flower there and get a little dusting of pollen on their forehead in the process and help pollinate help spread the pollen around for the Columbine. Of course, sunflowers, we know that sunflower is a very popular bird seed to put in our feeders. You can plant your own native sunflowers that will also be attractive to birds and be lovely. Milkweed, Pardon me, let me get a drink of water here. My throat's getting scratchy. I haven't talked in 2 years, so I'm out of practice. Okay, so milkweeds. We know that milkweeds are really important as a food source for monarch butterfly caterpillars, but they're beautiful for one thing. I don't even know how many different species there are in Michigan. At least 10, I would say, if not more. So a whole variety suited to different habitat types. If you have a wet swampy area, there's swamp milkweed. If you have a dry sandy area, there's butterfly milkweed. There's the common milkweed that you see that's like a sunny, dry area type milkweed, but you'll see that a lot of times on roadsides and fallow farm fields. But the seeds of that provide really fantastic nesting material. If you can picture a seed pod of a milkweed has those real fluffy white seeds that makes great nesting material for birds. Virginia creeper is a native vine. It sometimes gets confused with poison ivy. Poison ivy has 3 leaves. Virginia creeper has 5 leaves and isn't poisonous in any way, doesn't cause itchy rashes. Turns a really lovely red color in the fall and has berries that birds really like to eat. I have a lot of that. I have a fence between my yard and my neighbor's yard, and I like to have some vegetation growing on it as a natural screen, and a lot of that vegetation is Virginia creeper. Elderberry is a fantastic shrub that has really pretty flowers, white flowers in the spring, and then purple berries that the birds love to eat in the fall. Dogwood trees, this is another one. There are many species of dogwood trees that are native to Michigan. It's a good shrub for habitat for birds. And some of them have really attractive flowers in the spring, and then they all have berries that are a good food source. And that's another one, there's enough varieties that they can fit almost any habitat. Oak trees, of course, are a big, tall, wonderful tree with acorns. They host a lot of different insects in the spring that are very important for many of our early migrating birds. Many of our warblers depend on eating insects out of the tippy tops of oak trees. So if you have a spot in your yard for an oak tree, I highly recommend it. Cherry trees, again, these are big, tall trees that provide nesting habitat and berries for the birds to eat, as well as attracting insects for birds to eat. And last, but certainly not least, are evergreen trees. And again, if you have a space in your yard for an evergreen of some kind, they provide excellent shelter for a whole variety of birds. So I've given you a little background and hopefully excited you about this idea. And here's a photograph. This is a white-winged crossbill feeding on hemlock cones. And I mentioned I have hemlock trees in my front yard. This is one of the birds we got in our hemlock trees. This is rare. This is not a common visitor to this part of Michigan. It's a type of finch, actually, that every now and then, they're more northern species, but every now and then a few will come south and they feed on conifers. And so we were lucky enough a few years ago to be looking out our window and see some strange activity in our hemlock tree. And it was these white-winged crossbills. And it's hard to see in this picture, but they're called crossbills because their bills actually do cross at the end. And it's not a deformation. That's how they're supposed to be, but they use them to pry little tiny hemlock cones. So in the background here, there's a hemlock cone. They're just like a tiny little 1/2-inch cone, but the white-winged crossbills get their beaks in there and pry them open. So a really interesting bird that we were lucky enough to have because we have hemlocks in our yard. So anyway, how to get started in your yard if you're thinking about doing something like this. It's like anything, start small. Don't decide to redo every aspect of your landscaping right away, or you'll quickly get overwhelmed. At least I do. That's how I operate. So that's my advice. Think about what you already have if you're wanting to make some changes, what are the things that you already have that will continue to work well? If you're upgrading for the birds, draw out your design before you start digging in the dirt. I mean, buying plants and digging in the dirt is the best part, but before you do that, make a design so you kind of know what you're getting into, and you know where you need to dig, and you know how many plants you need to get, and you have a good idea of what you're getting into before you get too far ahead of yourself. I like to start projects with just reducing my lawn. You know, I don't like mowing my lawn. I have a kid and a dog, so I need a little bit of lawn for them, you know, to run around in. But because I have a kid and a dog, my little bit of lawn that I do have, it's not great. It's not beautiful. It's not golf course quality. So I realized, I don't really need that much. I can put in some other plants and just, you know, keep a little strip of lawn, but have a bunch of other plants around that. So think about where in your yard you can reduce lawn area. Find a good nursery. If I should have thought ahead and tried to come up with some good sources for you folks up in the Holland area, because I know there are some good nurseries that have native plants. I'm just not going to be able to pull them up from the depths of my memory right now. But if you look up Michigan native plants, you will be able to come up with some good resources. But if you find a good nursery that's nearby, they can be very helpful in recommending good plants for your yard and your area. And then think about adding plant diversity into your existing landscape. How can you add different heights of things? How can you add as many different species? And think about, as you're picking out what plants you want, think about what they offer to birds. Do they offer food sources? Do they offer nesting materials, roosting sites, nesting sites, those sorts of things? And if you can pick one plant that does all of those things, all the better. So another really important aspect of all of this is to be a good neighbor and be a good ambassador. You know, I talked earlier about not keeping things too tidy, but paying attention to the weed ordinances in your area. And, you know, I am not a confrontational personality, so I do not want to be the one who's fighting against my local government and fighting with my neighbors or my homeowners association. I want to make sure that I'm following the local rules, that I'm not irritating my neighbors. So talk about what you're doing, talk to your neighbors, make sure you're following all your local ordinances. And consider your neighborhood. If you live in a neighborhood that is very tidy and has very tidy landscaping, you probably will need to fit in with that. You'll probably just have to be thoughtful about what your final look will be. And so you're not drawing too much attention to yourself, unless that's your personality, and then you be you. But again, that's not my personality. I wanted to make sure that my neighbors understood what I was doing and what I was getting at. So I talked to them. I have signage. I have this Monarch way station sign is one that I put in my yard so people can see that what you're doing is intentional and planned. You can also certify your habitat through the National Wildlife Foundation. That's the other sign that's on that page there. And so if you have a little sign like that in your yard, people can see, I see what they're doing. They're doing this intentionally. They haven't just let it go to weeds. They have a plan here and they're trying to do something. And then you can also go a long way with having tidy parts of your yard and not just having the whole yard be, you know, like a field of wildflowers, which that would be my preference personally, but I live in a city. I have neighbors. Not everybody has the same feeling about how their yard should look. So if you have an edge of some kind, you know, the grass is tidily mowed up to here, and then there's edging, and then beyond that, I have some native wildflowers in clumps that looks a little more like a garden than like, you know, a wildflower field. So there are definitely ways to do this, and that photo there in the lower left is kind of an example of that. They have mowed lawn, but then they also have a lot of taller plants, but it's definitely more a garden style than a nature, you know, what things would look like in nature, but it's a perfect compromise, I think. There's a path through the wildflowers, so it looks very intentional. The wildflowers are in clumps. They're not just willy-nilly. Again, that's kind of my preference, but that's a personal choice. And so there are definitely ways to do this and have a much more tidy and landscaped look. And one of the fun things about my yard, where I am, I have 2 different school groups that walk by. I'm near a YMCA, and they have an after-school program that kind of walks through the neighborhood. And then there's another private school that their kids walk through the neighborhood quite a bit. And they stop in front of our yard almost every day, especially during the summer, because there's so many butterflies and honeybees and birds. And even though it's just this tiny little city yard, there are these kids that stop and look, and they point at the monarch sign, and they point at the butterflies. And it's just really cool. I love having it as, a conversation piece. This is a little more information on that National Wildlife Federation. That there was a sign on that previous slide. These are the sorts of questions that you can go through to become certified. I think there is a fee. I don't think it's much, but I think there is a fee, so they can send you a sign. But so they'll ask you questions like, do you have at least 3 food sources for wildlife? Do you have at least 1 water source, 2 sources of cover, 2 places where wildlife can raise their young? Do you practice soil and water conservation practices? Do you control invasive species? Do you use organic practices? So those are the types of questions, pardon me, they're just, yes or no questions, fairly easy to go through. Even if you decide not to, become certified, it's a great just sort of checklist for you to go through and make sure you are using as many of these principles as possible. Oh, there's a kid walking by my yard right now. I want to talk just a little bit about safety. If we are going to attract a lot of birds to our yard, it has to be safe, right? We can't be attracting them into an unsafe environment. That's just not fair. And so one of the big things that I think people don't necessarily think about is making sure your windows are bird safe. And there's a lot of new research coming out about how to keep birds from hitting window glass. And I will admit I'm not up to speed on all of the latest research, but that's why I included that link in there. There is, I know there's something about the pattern that you have on your glass that will help birds be able to see the window and not, they don't just see a reflection and fly into that, they actually can see it. I know in my, I have a big picture window and I have some of those decals up against the window, so they won't run into it. But I also, what I've done is I've put the bird feeders quite close to that window. So they're not, when they take off from the feeders, they don't have a lot of momentum. So if they accidentally do hit the window, it's not a fatal strike. They just sort of bounce off. And it doesn't even happen that often. It must be, the decals must be working. But if you're building a new house, you can actually buy glass that's bird safe glass. I don't know the cost of it. I don't know. I presume it's more expensive than regular glass, but there's some kind of pattern in it. And I think the idea is that it's visible to the birds from the outside, but not to you from the inside. So just something kind of interesting. Of course, keep cats indoors if you have cats. If you have outdoor cats, please don't try to attract birds to your yard, or you're just luring them to their death. But there's a kitty here behind the bird safe glass. So please keep cats inside, and then clean your feeders and your bird baths regularly. You can just, dip them in a diluted bleach solution, but that's really important to keep from spreading disease. There are a lot of diseases that are easily passed from close contact, as we all know too well from the last few years, but the same is true in birds. And there is an avian flu that's been discovered in Michigan right now. So keeping your feeders clean is a good idea. All right, let me show you a little yard tour. So again, it's a small lot in Kalamazoo, Michigan, small front yard, small backyard. But we've done what we can with it. So this is right before we transformed our landscaping. So 2008 was the year we had, beautiful grass in really fantastic condition. No, we did not feel like we needed to protect this grass for anything. Here are, I know this is a dark photo, but there are some hemlock trees here. There was some landscaping here at the edge and a yew and a rhododendron bush right up against the house there. So this was sort of our blank slate. That's what it looked like at first. So we dug out all the grass and we put in a little pathway and we lined it with bricks just to, like I mentioned earlier, try to keep some parts of it with a more tidy look. We added a little shape to it by mounding up some of the dirt into a little hill here. So we would have a little variation in heights, just for fun. Here it is in June of that year, just right after we planted it. So all of these are Michigan native plants, and it's just long enough ago that I can't remember how many different species we planted, but both my husband and I love plants, so we probably planted far too many species for the space, in all honesty, but you'll see in a minute here, it worked out. And we put in this little stepping stone path through it too, again, just to add a little element of tidiness and so people could really walk right through it. And the previous owners had a lot of landscaping rock, which has been great for us. So we could build up that little mounded area in the back and support it with some rocks. And we left in the plant tags at first so we could remember what we had planted where, but we took those out after a little while. And here's what it looked like by that July. So I should also say we didn't start with seed. We started with wildflower plugs. And so right away, we had things blooming even in that first year, which doesn't always happen. But yeah, it looked, in my very humble opinion, it looked great right away because we used some pretty mature plants. And we do, we're not purists. We do have some non-native plants. So we have some hostas in the front here. Those were there and they're fine. They're not native, but there's not a problem with them. We have some variegated Solomon seal, which is also, Solomon seal is a native plant, but the variegated kind is more of a horticultural. It's not a full native, but that was there and it's not causing any problems. And I think it's pretty, so we've left that. But we have purple coneflower, gray-headed coneflower, some butterfly milkweed. This white spiky plant is called Culver's root. Let's see what else is blooming here. This yellow is Coreopsis. We have a lot of lupin. We have a lot of spiderwort, ostrich fern. The front part is very shady. So that's why ferns and hostas are doing really well in this area. This part of the yard gets quite a bit more sun. We do have some smaller shrubs. We have a shrub called New Jersey tea and lead plant. You can't see them in this picture, but they're in this front part of the yard. They're just really small shrubs. So we really have a lot of diversity on this really small plot of land, again, because we're kind of plant nerds and we wanted to put as much as possible into that small space. Here's a view from a different angle. These are horticultural irises. Again, they were there, but I like them, so we left those in. Let's see, what else? We have some bee balm here in the front. We have some blazing star here. I think the rest, we do have some black-eyed Susans, but they aren't blooming in this photo. But a nice variety of things that are blooming throughout the year. And I have another picture that's taken in the fall, so you can see how it changes throughout the seasons. Oh, this is still in July, just a different view. You can see my hemlocks here and my little decorative birdhouse there. We thought it was a decorative birdhouse, and then the wrens moved in. They were very happy. Here's a close-up. So the next year, this is May of 2009. So different things are blooming in May. We've got the lupin here and Columbine. There's something else blooming in the back that I can't tell quite what it is. Photo's too small. And now this is after a few years, and this is in its less tidy state after a couple years of neglect. I should say I had a child in 2009. And if any of you are familiar with that experience, you know some of the things that you used to pay close attention to in your life, you pay less attention to. In my life, it was landscaping. I paid a little less attention to my landscaping for a few years there. And so this is after 3 years of basically neglect. I would say this is a garden that has not been cared for in any way for 3 years. So this is not tidy. Again, my neighbors, it didn't bother my neighbors. The birds loved it, the wildlife loved it, but it would be very easy just to weed along the edges, bring those edges back, expose that brick. It wouldn't be too hard to make it look tidy again. It just was not my priority at that time. But this is a fall picture, so you can see what it looks like in the fall. There's a ton of aster blooming. That's the purple, is New England aster. We have some sunflowers over on the right-hand side, some native sunflowers. This is brown-eyed Susan blooming in the front. We have some bee balm in the front here as well. So this is, I would say this is like a worst case scenario, right? Again, I have a pretty high tolerance for things that don't look tidy, and this is tolerated in my neighborhood. But this is what it could look like if you let it go for 3 years. I don't think it's a terrible scenario myself. I'm biased, I know. And I also want to, point out that if we are building a landscape for the birds, it's going to have a lot of other benefits. It's going to provide a clean water benefit. Any runoff that's coming off of your house, instead of running off like a mowed grass lawn, water will tend to infiltrate more when you have deep-rooted native plants. It'll tend to run off more when you have lawn grass. And so planting native plants is beneficial for water quality. For pollinators, of course, you're attracting all kinds of native bees and butterflies. It's good for clean air, good for the food web. It's just supporting the natural food web much more and reducing your carbon footprint as well. Oh, and these are both photos from my yard. There's a gray tree frog sitting on an iris leaf and a lightning bug on an obedient plant. And so, I've heard a lot of people being concerned about losing amphibian species and losing fireflies. We have so many fireflies in our neighborhood, and I like to think it's because we have a lot of people that have vegetation like this. And again, we're right in the middle of the city. Like I said earlier, my yard does back up to a nature preserve, so that certainly helps. But we see a lot of fireflies right on our street. So I think we're doing something right. I like to think so. Also, all those native plants help prevent erosion and help prevent that soil from washing into our storm drains and waterways and things like that. So here is a robin feeding its young. Here are some of the resources that I think are especially good for looking into if this is the sort of thing you want to do. I've given sort of a broad overview. And if you really want to go into this in detail, you're going to want more help. And so here are some of the resources for you. And these are in the chat, so you can copy and paste those out of the chat if you need them. And then, of course, there are really good written resources as well. And I just have to give a shout out to these 2 books by Douglas Talamin, who's sort of at the forefront of pushing some of these ideas that we've talked about today. So he has a couple of really excellent books. They're very readable, full of inspiration and good information. And if this is something you're interested in, I'd really encourage you to check those out. Also, of course, we've been in COVID era for a couple of years, so there haven't been as many options, but as much as you can, go to different workshops, reach out to other people who are doing these things. There's another organization, think, did I include them on my previous slide? Yes, Wild Ones Natural Landscapers is the second one I listed there. They're a fantastic organization. They have chapters around the country, and they basically are a nonprofit that promotes the use of native plants. So I'll host plant exchanges where if you have too many of one kind of plant, you bring it and other people come and take your plants, and they had too many irises, you take their irises. And it's just a great way to meet other people who are interested in this kind of thing and get information. They'll host yard tours and things like that too. We've done some yard tours of our yard. So as you know, there are a lot of different opportunities to get out there and connect with other people that are doing these kinds of things and can help support you on your journey. So to recap, just to wrap it all up, think about mimicking nature as much as possible. Look at what's happening in the natural world around your house and try to copy that. Reduce your lawn as much as possible. Use native plants, put native plants in where you used to have lawn. Maximize your plant diversity as much as you can. Think about the different layers. Think about the structure, the tall trees and the shrubs and the lower growing plants. Leave plants standing over winter as much as you can, and provide a water source. And start small. Don't do it all at once. And I just wanted to end. This is a quote from that Doug Talamin that I showed the covers of his books a few minutes ago. And I think it just really gets at this idea that we're part of the ecosystem. I think a lot of times humans, we think of ourselves, we're humans, and then the environment is out there. No, we're part of it. It can happen in our yards, in our lives. So what can we do as gardeners? How can we support our nation's wildlife? And the little picture on the left hand side there, our yards are the future of conservation. If we think our yards are separate from nature, then I think we're doing a great disservice to our natural world. So as much as possible, trying to incorporate those natural elements into our yard. We're all part of the ecosystem, and we can all play a role. And there's my contact information. If anyone has questions that come up, I'll take time for questions now, of course, but if you think of a question tomorrow or next week or anything, certainly reach out to me. I work part-time, so it might take me a little while to get to your email, but I will respond eventually. And I can also put you in touch with other resources. The Ottawa Conservation District is fantastic, so I'm sure they have folks there that can be a really good resource for you as well. And with that, I will take any questions or thoughts that anybody has.
Erin, could you explain, review a little bit why it's important to reduce your lawn? Is that to save water?
I'm glad you say that, because I didn't really say why, did I? I just said to do it. So you just listen to me, just do it because I said so. No, so the idea there is that lawns aren't doing anything for wildlife, or doing very little. Lawns are what humans want to see, what we've been trained is the right look, I think, but they aren't supporting the ecosystem in any significant way. And so by reducing your lawn size, you can have more native plants, more shrubs, more trees, more of those things that are supporting the ecosystem. And in the meantime, you reduce your mowing time, you reduce the gasoline you use in your mower, you save water because you're not needing to irrigate. I think I didn't say that explicitly, but one of the nice things about native plants, they're adapted for our area, and so you should not need to irrigate them much or water them much. In the first year when you first plant them, they might need some water, but after that, I have not watered my yard for, let's see, I put it in 2008. So yeah, I haven't watered it in 10 years at least.
Wow.
Thank you.
Jen, I do have some questions that have come into the chat. One is if you have any suggestions for a large front yard that has a septic drain field under it. There are many trees around the perimeter, but this person would love to add in more garden space.
Oh, that's a great question that I don't have a fantastic answer to. Because I'm not a septic expert, but I know you're not supposed to plant trees and shrubs over the drain field. I don't know. There are some native plants that have really deep tap roots. I don't think that would be a good solution, but I wonder if some of the native plants that have more fibrous roots would be good. And this is where like going to your nursery and talking to them. Can whoever wants to know that, could you shoot me an email and I will try to follow up and see if there's like a list of plants that are appropriate.
Sure.
I don't want to go too far off the cuff because I don't want to give you wrong information, but
Sure,
that's
I'll
an answer I
send
should
her,
know.
Sure, I can send that person your email and have her reach out to you.
Perfect.
Then we're getting a couple questions, not surprisingly, about deer. One is, do you have deer in your neighborhood? Because this person says they eat almost everything they try to plant. And then another person is saying that deer raids her bird feeders. Are there any ideas about how to help or discourage that?
Yeah, so let me answer the first one first. Yes, there are a ton of deer in my neighborhood. I think what has protected me is, for one thing, I have a lot of plants, as you could see in that final picture. And so a little bit of deer munching doesn't show that much. They also, I have a lot of neighbors that only have hostas as their landscaping, and deer love hostas. And so they, I think, maybe go to those first. Also, I think what has saved me is that we planted our yard in 2008. There were deer in Kalamazoo at that point, but it was not, the population has really exploded here since then. And so I think our plants were able to get established before the deer could come in. I think if they were baby plants, they would be mowing them down. So to prevent that, if you can put in a temporary fence while the plants are getting established, and again, you'll have to check your local ordinances and see what you can do fencing wise. That's an option. There are some sprays that you can use. You have to apply them regularly. You have to apply them after a rain. So it's not easy. It's a real problem. I don't want to diminish this because I don't have, there's not a silver bullet. No pun intended. there's not a great solution in a city environment for protecting from deer. And what was the second question? The second question was deer related, but I've already lost it. What was it?
They are raiding bird feeders.
Oh, raiding bird feeders. Yeah. So where my bird feeders are, they're in a fenced area that the deer actually can't get over. So I think that really would be the only thing that I know of would be to just, if you could put a fence around, the birds can get through the fence or over the fence. Again, there's not a great solution. Deer can be really destructive in the environment when they're overpopulated, and right. In some areas they certainly are. So
there's also a question then, which might have the same problem without using some sort of fencing, but are there any vegetables that you could grow that contribute to a bird-friendly yard?
Ooh. I only garden native plants and like basil, so I'm not the best one to answer this. I do know that, let's see, well, at least for butterflies, parsley and dill are attractant to, I think it's this, it's one of the swallowtail butterflies. I'm sorry, I'll come up with this answer in about an hour. So
okay, no problem.
But I know they are a food source of the caterpillars of a swallowtail butterfly. So okay. That's not as much bird related, but certainly anything you plant, if it's going to attract insects, it will also attract birds. It does give me one idea about deer that I don't know for sure, but I know deer don't like strongly scented things. So I wonder if you did have like wild garlic or onions or that kind of thing planted around the perimeter. And there are some native species of, there's a nut called a nodding wild onion. I wonder if that would help keep them at bay.
Okay.
No promises. I think they adapt as we try to find ways to keep them out of our yards. They're adapting. So
Yeah, for sure. I think the last one in the chat that I have is just, and maybe you had talked about this earlier and I missed it, but what about the issue of ticks in leaf debris?
oh, that's a good one. Ticks are awful, and what I've heard is that they like moister areas. And so that may be an argument for doing some leaf cleanup in the fall, or at least being thoughtful about where your leaves are. And if they're in an area that you're walking through regularly, maybe keeping them cleaned up so those areas will dry out a little bit more. It's certainly a problem we have in our yard. We have ticks. Again, the deer and living next to a natural area, that's just part of our lives now, unfortunately.
You know, if it's true that if you have chickens that they eat ticks and bad bugs like that, if you let them wander?
They do. I don't know. I don't know, like, if they would totally destroy the population. It wouldn't hurt, certainly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm in no way an expert on that. We do a tick check every day during tick season, and the tick population has really exploded over the last few years, as probably as the deer population has really exploded. And so that's just part of our lives now, is there's a tick check every day, and so far so good.
Good. Question just came in then about ticks again. Have you ever used, I think it says nematodes to control ticks?
I have not. That's beyond what I know. I wish I knew, but I don't have.
It's okay.
I don't know.
All right, I think that's all I have in the chat. So if anyone else wants to ask a question or make a comment, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask it of Erin while we still have some time left.
Hi, Erin. We have a pileated woodpecker who is pounding on one of the trees we would like to keep in our yard. And can they actually kill the tree? And if so, how could we discourage them?
I don't think they will actually kill the tree, but if it's pounding on the tree, it may mean that the tree already has a bug infestation. The tree might be on its way out and the bird knows it.
Oh, okay.
But
they make gigantic holes. I mean, like the hole in the tree is like this big already.
Yeah, and so, but if it's building a hole, or if it's making a cavity for a nest, it'll need that part of the tree would need to already have some decay in it, or be hollow on the interior. So let me backpedal. It could kill the tree, in that any kind of a wound on a tree can attract fungus and insects that can then cause further harm. I don't think the pileated alone would kill the tree. I think it's more a sign that the tree might already have some issues. I wish I were a forester and could give you a better answer.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you also asked about just if there was a way to discourage them. I don't think it's a be all and end all solution, but you could any type of material that would sort of flash in the light, like some tinfoil or pie plates, you could put around that area. Just like wrap a cord around the tree in that spot and tape some pie plates to it or something. Again, it's not perfect, but it might help. It won't hurt. It won't hurt, might help.
Hi, Erin. This is Ralph. What about too many birds? We get a lot of red-winged blackbirds, and they come in and they take over the bird feeder.
Yeah, that's another tough one. You only have hard questions. Where are all the easy questions? So the way I handle this is I just figure they're native birds, they need a food source. Usually with red-winged blackbirds, at least what I have found is it's a really concentrated period of time. Like they'll come in and just take everything for 2 weeks and then they disappear. And it has to do with their nesting and migration cycles. And so I just don't worry about it. Every now and then I get a horde of starlings, and starlings are not native birds. So I already am like predisposed to not care about them as much. But they can come in and just like tear through a suet cake in a day. And so if that is happening, I'll just stop feeding for a few days until they change their patterns, and then I'll start feeding again. And it's like a reset. Again, it's not perfect. So a combination of not caring and just stopping feeding for a few days is my method.
Thank you.
Suggestion?
What's that?
Yeah, I would say I have a suggestion. I belong to a garden club where they had tons of deer, and their solution was to take a coat hanger and make like a little hook on it. And they took a nylon, filled it with Irish Spring soap, like shredded. They hate the smell of that. And they would kind of put those around the perimeter. No deer.
That's great. You know that, and now that you say that, I have heard that. Because I haven't had to try it in my yard, I can't speak to it. But yeah, I think you're right. They don't like strongly scented things. So that Irish Spring is strongly scented. And happy St. Patrick's Day, it's part of the theme. But yeah, you can try that for sure.
Erin, I have a question for you about your lovely flower and plant-filled front yard. And I don't know if you mentioned this. Did you have to amend your soil quite a bit when you made that change?
I didn't at all. We didn't do anything. We just took out the sod. And that's one of the great things about native plants is that they're really, a lot of them will grow. I mean, as long as you pick the right plant for like your basic soil, how moist it is and what kind of sun conditions you get, they aren't very picky. And so, yeah, I didn't amend my soil. I've never fertilized anything. And in fact, fertilizing is frowned upon if you're using native plants because that tends to encourage the weeds. The native plants don't need it, and you're fertilizing the weeds usually. So what's happened in my yard now that it's been in landscaping, native landscaping for 14 or so years, is things have moved around. Some things, like I hardly have any lupin anymore, which is sad because it's one of my very favorite plants, but I think all the other plants got too tall for it. Now it's only exists on the edges. So things have kind of moved around and found their niche, and some things have died out, some things have proliferated. So things, and again, I could be managing it a lot more closely if I cared, but I don't care. I just let the plants do what they want to do. But no amending or anything. I suppose if you had really, really sandy soil, if you live on Lake Michigan, yeah, you might need to add some compost or something, but in general, you should not need to do any fertilizing or amending.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, lots of good questions. My goodness. On that note, let's all get outside.
Yeah, go play in your yards.
Yeah.
Start
Hey,
sketching,
Kim.
start dreaming.
Yes, Jim.
Kim,
Yes.
can we get copies of some of these slides?
That's
that
up to
she's
Aaron.
used?
That's up to
Yeah,
Aaron if she wants
absolutely.
to share it. Okay.
Yeah, if Kim, if I like emailed you a PDF or something of the slides, you would be able to just distribute it.
Yes, I
Perfect,
could
yeah.
email it. I could email it to the registrants. That would be great.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll do that right after we're done here.
Okay.
Thank
then
you.
oops, sorry, my phone is not off. I also have a quick question that just came in. What are good plants for very shady lots? Hosta, right?
Yeah, so hosta's a non-native one that's good. There are a lot of good spring wildflowers. Again, like look to nature, go for a walk in a shady natural area and see what's growing there. So spring wildflowers, mayapple, trillium, spring beauty, and then later in the season there are some ground covers. Wild ginger is one. I have a pretty shady yard, so I have a lot of wild ginger. The bloom on that is it's not like a big spectacular bloom, but the leaves are really lovely. They're like a velvety green. So it's sort of this pretty ground cover. Ferns. And then there are some wildflowers that will do okay in partial shade. So it depends on how full shade you have. If it's real full shade, it's probably going to be things like ferns and ground covers. But things like lupin will do okay in partial sun. One of the species of coneflowers will do okay in partial sun. Again, here's where a nursery, going to a nursery that you trust and respect can really help out a lot. They can give you some good recommendations.
I'll just email it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Tom, are you out there? Sorry, hold on. I'm going to switch to
Yep, I'm here.
put everybody on screen. There we go. All right. Tom,
Yeah.
I will let you wrap us up.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. Aaron, I just wanted to thank you for your very informative presentation
So good.
and the enthusiastic way that you did it, and really appreciate it. And best wishes from everyone at HAS.
Thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks everybody for the fantastic questions. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yep.
what a perfect day for this presentation. Oh my
Yes.
goodness.
Yep.
Amazing.
Yep.
Good job,
Go
Tom.
enjoy
Good
it.
job. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Yep. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.